final turn, and even if you feel like you're in 17th place, we now know you can still get to first place on the last stretch here. We're going to wrap things up today with a sponsored session. So a little bit different format here. This session is being sponsored by SmartRent, and I'm going to turn the time over to our sponsor, who's going to have a few minutes to be able to talk a little bit about their product, and then our sponsor, Greg, is actually going to be on our panel today, and so we'll weave in their viewpoint into our topic today of connected communities. So I'll turn the time over to Greg with SmartRent.
Thank you, everybody, for an awesome week so far. I just want to mention that we've had some really good connections so far. I've met a lot of great people, had some really good conversations. It was a learning experience for us as well, learning how you guys are adopting smart home technology. So I hope you guys all had a really good week. We've really appreciated it. But I want to talk to you a little bit about SmartRent, what we do, if I haven't had a chance to talk to you yet. So SmartRent is really built out of an operational platform. We do smart home technology, but what you really want to know about SmartRent is that we are based out of operations. We are basically an amenity to your residence by default, but we want to streamline and improve your operations first and foremost. How we kind of do that is we have our software, which we want to make sure that we tie in all of the different smart home technology that you want to put into your communities and tie that all back into one singular software and one single app. We also want to make sure that you're integrated, so you're not siloed in your operations. We want to make sure we have all the integrations with the major PMSs like Yardi, RealPage, Entrada, all the major CRMs. The other piece of this that we do is we want to be as hardware flexible as possible. It's really important. We want to make sure that if you are adding hardware and smart hardware into your community, that you are not beholden to whoever is the provider. You can still we use Yale locks, for instance. We're going to use Honeywell thermostats. We're the largest buyer in the nation for Honeywell thermostats, and we're also the largest buyer in the nation for Yale locks. I'm mentioning that because we have a huge stockpile. We've tried to get a hold in front of any kind of supply chain issue. And we want to make sure that we can pass that on to you guys as well. The last piece of that, what we do and what makes us a little bit different, is our installation and training. We do a white glove installation and training. We have W2 SmartRent employees that are going to be overseeing the entire operation, whether that's a retrofit or a new construction. But we also are going to take care of any of the pairing, all of the install, all of the training for your teams, all of the trainings for the residents as well, so that they know how to use their smart home technology too. So a little bit about us, a little bit more, is we're pretty battle tested as far as our installs. This is as of Q4, we have 340,000 units installed nationally, and some in Canada. We just had our earnings call yesterday, so these numbers will be getting updated, but if you want to do some math, we typically do about 20 to 30,000 units per month on installs. We're well over 2 million devices being serviced as well, and very well funded. We went public in August. Mentioning that because we've had people come out of the market. We're here to stay, and we want to make sure we're growing with multifamily for you. So this is what our idea of what a smart connected community will look like. Multiple pieces of this. Smart apartments. Once you have all your apartments smart, now all of your units can be self-guided touring units. So adding in self-guided touring. How do people get in? Once they're in, how do they navigate? Access control. Are they parking? We can do smart parking for you as well, making sure that you can automate that whole entire process. When somebody comes to the front door, can you do video intercom? We also offer Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi being a huge piece for us. It's a backbone of how you're going to do a lot of your smart home technology, and it's really important to make sure that you have a good provider for the Wi-Fi. So some of the values that we have: increase in revenue, decrease in costs, decrease in complexity. The increase in revenue piece, I think that's how you guys want to look at it, but our main focus is going to be that decrease in cost and the decrease in complexity. Some of the stats that we have, 20 to 30% savings on utilities, because now you're able to run your vacants and you're able to put protocols in there to make sure that your vacants, like your thermostat, isn't going to be sitting at 90 degrees when your resident leaves. As soon as it goes into a vacant mode, then it can automatically be set to 74 and it can't move even though if you have a vendor coming in or out. So we have a lot of operational savings with that from the utility side. Water leak. This is a huge one for us too. Automating the water leaks and water damage. I believe it's UDR on one of their calls said that they are seeing about 85% reduction in water damage claims through their entire portfolio. Wow. That is huge, considering you can reduce it by 85%, but also an 85% reduction on how much those claims cost, which is typically around $11,000 per unit, or I'm sorry, per event, because it's going to cover multiple units. And then in the increase in rent that we typically see, we've got another slide on that. Usually about, on average right now, we're about $37 per month, and people are willing to pay it basically all day, every day. We're not seeing any pushback on that. And it's really based on the locale as well. Where are you located? What are you going to be able to get? If you're in North Dakota, you might get $10. If you're in San Francisco, for instance, we have properties that are over there that are getting $350 to $400 increase in rents just by adding smart home technology. So to kind of give you a little idea of some of our integration, some of our partners that are out there, we have spent a lot of time to make sure that our software integrates properly so that we can do a single point of moving people in and moving people out. We don't want you to necessarily have to work through a dashboard. We want you to be able to work through your own operating system currently. So think about the 10 steps it takes to move somebody in or move somebody out. We've drilled that down so that it's really move in directly to our software. Everything's provisioned, everything's automated, and move out, one click. So one click to move in, one click to move out. And that's what I got. Thank you.
So hopefully it feels like we're bringing this full circle, right? We started off on Tuesday with Lisa and her diagram, and today we're talking about that cloud. You know, we have the CRM in the box in the middle. The cloud is then allowing you to be able to interact with all the different devices and systems and do so in a comprehensive way, which creates this connected community. I'm going to introduce our virtual panelists here in just a moment, but just to kind of set the expectations of what we're hoping to do here is that we've got some discussion, and instead of a Q&A at the end, Greg is being a good father. He's coaching a baseball game this afternoon back in Virginia, so he is going to leave probably by the time we'll start our Q&A to go catch his flight. But I like each of you to think, what are some takeaways you've had so far over the last 48 hours? And in that last 10 minutes, I'd like to just have an open discussion and talk about what are some of the things you're planning on taking away back to your offices, back to your fellow coworkers, and to put on the roadmap for the future and kind of reflect back on what we've learned over the last 48 hours and how you're going to apply that. So keep that in mind, start noodling that. So I'd like to now introduce our virtual panelist, Josh Delzo. Josh, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role and your company?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Josh Delzo. I am the Ancillary Services Manager for Ventura Realty. We are an owner-operator of approximately 70 Class A multifamily communities throughout the South and Southeast, about 20,000 units currently and growing very fast. We are primarily brownfield communities, but we have our first greenfield going live later this year. So looking forward to getting into that space. My role with the company, I oversee ancillary services. So that includes, managed Wi-Fi tech, package lockers, smart home, anything that really adds that extra value to our renters.
All right, so we're gonna open things up here. We've already introduced Greg. Talking about the definition of a connected community. So I'm gonna toss this to Josh first. And Josh, can you tell us, in your opinion, we talk about a connected community, what does that mean to you? And then we'll come back to Greg to add on that.
Sure. A connected community is a community that can utilize a variety of smart or internet connected devices throughout the entire community. This is both inside units, common spaces that can be managed from anywhere to achieve certain operational efficiencies, automations, as well as elevate the employee and resident experiences. I would say internet access throughout the entire community would be the backbone of a connected community. One example, of a possible resident experience that I could foresee on such a community. Let's say the resident comes home from work. The gate's going to automatically open when they pull up. Maybe they're driving a Tesla and there's a charger that's automatically reserved for them because we knew that their Tesla needed a charge. Maybe they grab their packages, from the lockers, that they already had the code for that were delivered earlier in the day. Head to their unit, during the day. Maybe the temp was optimized for energy costs, but we knew they were coming home, so their unit has been cooling so that it's comfortable, when they come in. Maybe they want to kick up and take their Wi-Fi to the pool and watch TV. I mean, really, that's the kind of experience that I could foresee on a fully connected community.
That sounds like a nice vision. How have you guys been able to help make this a reality, and anything you'd add to that definition?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Josh 100% that Wi-Fi is going to be the backbone. That's number one, first and foremost.
We heard that throughout the last 48 hours.
If you're going to have a smart community or a connected community, you've got to be able to have the infrastructure to add on all the smart technology that you want to do. And the other piece of this too is I would also challenge whether you look at your building and say, do you have a smart community or do you have a connected community? Because you may have a lot of smart products happening, but are they really solving all the operational issues or problems that may be coming up? How efficient are you? Do you have a smart community, but you have 8 dashboards and 5 different apps? Or do you have a connected community where everything's connecting so that your operations are connected as well, and everybody's talking and everything's seamless?
So rather than being siloed, making sure that all these different devices that are gathering input and that can share input are talking and communicating with each other.
Right. I mean, you've got your self-guided touring, you've got your smart homes, you've got your access control, you've got your video intercoms. I mean, you saw the slide that I had to put up earlier. All of those pieces, if they're fractured in their operation, now you've added another operational challenge to your on-site teams. And so that really needs to be condensed and consolidated into one.
Gotcha. So Josh, as we look over the last few years, what are some of the emerging technologies that you've deployed in your communities in order to be more connected?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different technologies that have been introduced in the past few years. I mean, the biggest, most impactful technology is certainly managed Wi-Fi. I would say that's the technology that's made it cost effective for us to implement a robust internet network throughout the entire community. So, we use access points in every unit and throughout common areas to build that network. And then from there, we can layer on various different technologies like access control, IoT solutions to really make, the experience that we want.
So we've been hearing this from lots of different people. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, touching on Wi-Fi again, right? And I think it's important to look at your Wi-Fi provider. How are they operating? And can this be a profit center for you, or is this something that you're adding as an amenity for your residents? There's Wi-Fi providers that are out there that are going to work just off of your IP address, meaning that it's going to follow you through the entire property, no matter where you are. You could have Wi-Fi in your home, but then you lose it when you go out to the pool because you're hoping that all the connections are right. But if it's following you with an IP address, you can move through the entire building. And I think I'd take it a step further that if you have these types of Wi-Fi, this type of Wi-Fi technology in multiple communities and they happen to be near each other, then you can pick up that IP address. The resident goes and says, hey, the pool over at this other property is a lot nicer. I already have all my access codes. I can go over there. And then it picks up the IP address. And now you're not talking just about a connected community, but more connected communities.
Yes. Yes. Here's a picture of their locker retrieval at one of Josh's facilities. I'm a numbers guy. I like the analytics. And so the question that I had for Josh is, as we talk about connectedness, do you have certain metrics that you track over time or have started to measure the level of connectedness or engagement? Can you quantify how you're seeing this being deployed in your communities? His response.
Sure. I mean, so when we implement managed Wi-Fi, one thing we'll do is use Wi-Fi heat maps. And this really we can chart the Wi-Fi strength at every location on our property using these heat maps and, boost the Wi-Fi where needed. Once that's deployed, we have a number of tools. We can see how many sessions are taking place. We can see the bandwidth that's being used in our community, so we can really make sure that the network is strong. So we have, real-time tools that let us monitor what's being used on that network and make sure that we're able to adequately increase bandwidth if necessary. So it's a snapshot. So someone will take a device and walk throughout the entire community, and so it's basically color coded. So if it's red, that means it's a very strong signal, all the way down to, it'll say it's a good signal, an average signal. It'll give you data like how many different access points am I seeing from this location. And we really want Wi-Fi access from corner to corner on our property. There's really, there are certain applications. For example, our EV chargers will need Wi-Fi access, so we may need those in the corner of the parking lot in some instances. So, or maybe our maintenance team is updating work orders from out in the park, so we need Wi-Fi access from corner to corner. It doesn't necessarily need to be as strong in places where we don't have high traffic, but we can use those heat maps to uncover a lot of data.
We were talking about this beforehand. I don't know, maybe some of you were so forward thinking, but 5 years ago, I couldn't have in my mind thought of why there'd be a valid use case for having Wi-Fi coverage through your parking lot, but yet here we are today where it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of a numbers guy myself, so we pull a lot of stats when it comes to the parking being one of them. How many cars are going in? How often are they coming in and coming out? Are you be able to monetize some of the parking? Things of that nature. We pull maintenance close times. There's tracking water damage reductions, on getting analytics on that. Also amenity usage in hours, so that you can effectively track what your amenities and what kind of spaces are actually being utilized the most, so that you can maybe adjust your amenities. You can look at your and a lot of the analytics that we're pulling should be from whoever provider it is. They should be able to give you that reporting and be able to put it into a BI tool for you as well, so that you can really break all of that down. Kind of give you an example of some of the stats that we get from some people that we work with. UDR had one of their calls, and I mentioned it earlier, but another one of the stats that they brought up is that they're now at 97% fully self-guided touring. So 97% of all of their tours are now self-guided tours. And with that, they were having, as everybody's probably dealt with, labor shortages and labor issues. They were able to reduce staffing by 30%. So when they were thinking they were running off of a skeleton crew, they actually weren't. They were running off of the crew that they needed. They just needed the automation to be able to handle it.
Right. 97%, that's eye-opening. This image up here is one Josh sent me. I love it. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but you've got someone with their laptop in front of the pool at the property, and they're running the speed test on their screen, and they've got 114 megs download and 131 upload speeds. I mean, I like that. Especially if I'm working from home, to be able to be on my computer and to be able to have that type of bandwidth and to potentially take Zoom calls when I'm in my shorts and my sandals, that sounds attractive to me. So as we look at technology on the horizon, there's this ever steady march of latest and greatest technology. If we're looking into the next 3 to 5 years and we scan what technology is on the horizon that might be of particular interest to residents in these communities, either because of the wow factor or the cost factor, what are those things, Josh?
So for me, I feel like artificial intelligence and machine learning is something that's going to get even bigger. We're already utilizing that to some degree. So for example, at Venterra, we're using our access control platforms in conjunction with our smart home technology to offer self-guided tours. So residents can schedule tours, get access to the community, tour the unit, and even apply without ever interacting with a human. I think this is gonna be even bigger. I can, in the next few years, I can reasonably see a world where the entire process from touring the apartment, applying the apartment, moving into the unit is entirely automated without any human interaction.
So taking that 97% and even pushing it further and further up the process.
Right. I mean, we're just short of basically the leasing process, the paperwork, right? So, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, there's a lot of technology that's coming out too. I mean, you look at, we talked about parking automation, right? Whether there's going to be cars or no cars. Like if it's, we kind of talked about that earlier, that there's properties out there that are going with no parking at all. And, working out deals with Uber and Lyft.
This was in Charlotte. We were talking about this before this started, that a couple properties in Charlotte, the municipal regulations changed where they didn't have to dedicate any parking per unit.
Right.
So they're creating a unit that has no parking, and they're able to take that space and convert that into revenue producing space in terms of units. But in addition, there's enough, I guess, gravy there that they're offering to those residents a deal with Lyft, Uber, where they have unlimited Lyft or Uber usage. I mean, that's just...
Well, I mean, you got to be near a mass transit probably, or a dense urban area. But yeah, it's happening. I've had multiple conversations even this week that it's being designed, it's being looked at, and it's heading in that direction in a way. So, but yeah, I mean, we've got, you also look at what other kind of technology is coming out is like centralized leasing is going to be a big thing. Centralized maintenance. How are you going to operate with all of that? Resident communication is going to be key. And I think one of the big things that everybody's looking at is all this technology that's coming in. The biggest technology that might be coming is making sure that it's secure, and there's a lot of security that's involved with it, so that you have, even if you consolidate it all, that it's very, very secure, because you don't want any kind of data breaches. It's going to, it's going to affect your property. It's going to affect your standing with your residents.
So we're hearing a lot of technologies that have been discussed in previous sessions over the last 2 days, and one that seemed to continue to pop up that I asked Josh about was door locks. How are you guys handling your door locks? Speaking of security, that's the one thing you don't want to get messed up, is to be able to have unlimited access. So here was his response on what they are doing for a door lock solution at their properties, which we've heard some that are kind of completely over on the pendulum with Gen Z, where it's like, hey, I want facial recognition, I want to have just near Bluetooth. Theirs is maybe not quite that far, but he talks about the practicality of how it's being deployed.
So we, in the past year, we've gone keyless with our smart home technology. So on the operational side, this is a great benefit because our staff no longer needs to go back to the office and use key systems. We're saving money on those key systems, which are very expensive. Our maintenance staff can, grab a code for a work order on the fly. So they don't, that's very simple. So we're all keyless. It's been a very easy transition for our residents, which I wasn't necessarily anticipating. So it's been a great experience going keyless. So when a resident moves in, they're assigned a 6-digit code for their unit. This can be customized after they move in. Our staff, each of our staff has a code for vacant units. Our staff, there are no permanent codes for occupied units for obvious reasons. And then when a work order is generated at the property, the resident will get a notification that a work order was generated for their unit. They have full visibility to who's entering their unit, when they're entering their unit, and we can even set controls on, what time frames that a code can be used, who can use the code, which vendors. And then on top of that, residents are able to generate temporary codes for their guests, for vendors. If they want a dog walker to come to their unit, they can set a code up that works on Wednesdays between 3 and 5 p.m., for example. So there's a lot of different applications for that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Anything you'd want to add to that?
I think he's pretty spot on. So,
okay. So my next question that I had for Josh was, what's been the most challenging part, particularly as you look at the technology infrastructure for their company to support, all of these Internet of Things?
Sure. For us, at Ventera, so we're mostly fully stabilized brownfield communities. So having to enter occupied units to install the technology, I would say, has been the biggest challenge. For these managed Wi-Fi build-outs, we're typically upgrading our infrastructure to future-proof it. So we're bringing in fiber. We're running new Cat 6A home runs to each unit. So this typically involves multiple trips to each unit. We have drywall cuts in some instances, so it can be pretty invasive. So working around the residents, they may not necessarily want to go through that process to get fiber, even though it's pretty valuable to add to the community. So working around that has been one major challenge. I would say another challenge for us has been integrating the various technologies, making them work together, work with our system. So when you have access control and managed Wi-Fi and smart home, those all need to work together to create one experience. So you have to work with the right partners to make sure they're integrating with each other and they can integrate with your system.
So I have a question for him in just a moment about, working with providers, but particularly when we're talking about some of the things he's mentioning there and the future proofing, what are some examples of where you've seen companies not future proofing, and what are some recommendations you have for making sure that you're future proofing?
Sure. I think when you're looking at all this technology that is just getting dumped into the market, right, and all this stuff that you can look at, the key word is going to be consolidation, right? You need to consolidate, kind of what Josh is saying. Like, you need to be able to consolidate all of this. You can't have all these dashboards and all of these different places where your on-site teams have to go, because it's not going to operate, and you're going to be in a fractured operation. The other piece of it is making sure that you're all on the same protocol. So you're not using Bluetooth and Z-Wave and Matter and all these other different protocols that are out there, because those are going to create operational challenges as well. So you want to make sure that it's all connected. To the point is that you want to make sure that it's all working within your ecosystem and your operations. If you're going to go Z-Wave, everything should go Z-Wave. If you're going to go Bluetooth, it should all be Bluetooth, instead of having this fractured way of looking at it.
I had a portion where I'd asked Josh about kind of which protocol they had settled on. I opted to leave it out of the deck, but he talked about Z-Wave has really been kind of what they've doubled down on, the mesh network of devices being able to, as you extend that network further and further out, and they talk to each other, that's been a great benefit. Is that kind of where you guys push people towards, or it really doesn't matter as long as you're being consistent across your entire design of your particular properties?
Yeah, to use the buzzword that we've been here all week, right? Future-proofing, right? If you're future-proofing your building, you're going to use a remote system. You're not going to need to be near any of the hardware to operate it. Bluetooth, you need to be near it. So if you're going with a Z-Wave, or if when it gets to Matter, things like that, everything should be remote. We have a joke internally that we typically run a building from a beach chair in Mexico. And that's kind of how you want it, because once you get back to the idea that things could get started getting centralized leasing, centralized maintenance, you're going to need a remote system. So it all needs to be working off of that remote protocol to make sure that you're being future-proofed down the road. Okay.
So Josh had mentioned about trying to find the right providers, and I'll admit up front, this is a testimonial. I wasn't soliciting him to mention SmartRent specifically, but he's going to. So the question I posed to Josh is, do you have specific providers that you found that worked well for you when you're trying to find that right provider? And here's his response.
Yeah, and really at Ventera, we like to work with partners where we can have some influence on the product. So we do use SmartRent for our smart home. And then we use partners that they integrate with. So Brevo is our current access control partner, although we are looking at their Alloy Access platform for other properties. But that all integrates with SmartRent. SmartRent is integrated with actually we have a in-house property management system. So SmartRent is integrated with that system. But generally, when we're looking for partners, we're looking for people that will both integrate with our own system and will let us have some sort of influence on the product.
Makes sense. Any other
Josh?
You like Josh? Okay, there we go. Yes. Another question for Josh. You do feel like that this goes back to what we've already seen talked about in breakfast with student housing and internet, and just how internet is continuing to increase in demand, and how do you feel like you've been able to fit that demand, and what are some of the challenges you've seen? And maybe a little bit further down, I think their demographic isn't necessarily Gen Z, but it's becoming so. How are they dealing with those challenges?
That's a great point. I think, when you're doing these projects, you always need to be looking to the future. We're starting to see multi-gig services. AT&T has now a 5 gig symmetrical product that they're doing on a retail basis. So first of all, we're putting in wiring that is capable. So Cat 6A can do up to 10 gig symmetrical in the future if we ever want to go down that road. We're doing very large circuits to the property, 10 gig circuits. We're definitely planning to add more bandwidth in the future when it's needed.
Yeah, certainly a challenge, and one that I always think that like we finally reached the end. We're now in 4K and 8K, and it's like once you think that you've got the bandwidth under control, there comes out some new technology that now it's going to be the three-dimensional 8K. So yeah, future-proofing seems important. So here's some examples of how Ventura has been able to kind of leverage what they're doing in their communities and some of their press releases, specifically around Wi-Fi, some other incentives to get people involved and to make this an asset that allows them to be able to attract new users. So the next question I had for Josh was, what's the biggest mistake that you've seen while trying to future-proof?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a mistake. We take over a lot of properties that have old bulk contracts that have very slow speeds, outdated infrastructure, and we can't touch those until that contract runs out. So that's definitely a mistake. For us, we've always been early adopters of this technology. So we actually started installing smart home back in 2018. And I don't know if I would call it a mistake, but we weren't planning for how that was going to work with these other technologies. And so now we're trying to go back and piecemeal that all together where now, I would be looking at, all right, how does this solution interact with the access control? How does it interact with the Wi-Fi provider that we're using? Is it all in one platform? How many apps do our residents have to download? I mean, just really thinking through the solution is something that I wish we would have done earlier on.
Any other examples you've seen of kind of biggest mistakes, either by clients or potential clients? What advice do you give customers as you're talking to them?
Yeah, I think we see one common mistake, and that's waiting. I'm going to wait until this kind of few more do this, or a few more properties, or a few more management companies. And there's a reason why some of the largest REITs in the industry are already way involved in this and doing it, because we're probably in like a 4 to 5 year window where you can actually increase rents. Because as it starts to build and more communities become smart communities, it's going to be an amenity that's just going to be a necessity at that point, right? I kind of give the example of there's the 18-year-old kid that's sitting at home right now. He's running everything off of his Alexa. He's got a smart door lock probably. He has his car. He probably uses his phone to start it. And some community down there, he's gonna start renting in 4 or 5 years, and they're going to hand him a key. And he's going to be like, you might as well just hand him a rotary dial phone. He's not going to know how to use it. He's not going to know what to do with it. But it's getting there, right? And so it's time to say, okay, well, you could do the revenue increase. You can do all the asset protection pieces, but you do it now while the window is still something that you can get your investment, you can get an ROI off your investment, versus needing to put it in because you need to be competitive.
Yeah, I'm going a little bit off script, but if I'm a property that really is looking just retrofit, like I'm not there, I didn't future-proof, and now I'm in the future, what do I do? What's your advice for someone who's in that position?
Yeah, I mean, you can still do retrofits. I mean, the retrofits are probably one of the biggest, about 90% of our business right now. So if you don't have the Wi-Fi, you could run things off of cell if you have a good cell connection. You want to get Wi-Fi in there. It's going to be an investment, right? No matter how you look at it, it's going to be an investment. But maybe you start with smart locks and you don't start with thermostats or something along those lines. But you want to make sure that that access piece is there. You start with self-guided touring. Just get your feet wet in it somehow to get it started, especially with the retrofit side of things.
That makes sense. Okay. Josh, parting advice that you would give to those in our audience to increase and redefine a connected community?
So I think my biggest piece of advice is just always be planning for future technologies, both known and unknown. So, when you're running conduit, leave extra room in the conduit for future wiring. Install, larger structured media panels than you think you'll need. definitely think about the, if you're, for example, we know that, Teslas are booming, so you're probably gonna have more of those on your property. So definitely be planning for the how you're going to power those throughout the community. Most properties don't have the power necessary to charge 30, 40 Teslas in the future. So that's definitely something that you should be planning for during the build process. The other advice that I would give is opt for shorter terms on your contracts when it's anything for tech. So for example, in the past, most owners have done, two contracts with two internet providers, and they're 10-year deals, and they're very restrictive. So those properties have to let those contracts run out before you can install some type of bulk solution. So definitely think about shorter contracts as well.
So we're telling you, prepare for a future where you don't have parking lots. I'm also telling you to prepare for a future where you need to have power for 30 Teslas. I'm glad I'm not sitting in your seat. Anything you'd add when it comes to advice to this group?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to keep echoing it. It's future-proofing and consolidation, right? You've got to look at your operations and do a full audit of your operations and say, if that's not smart now, it's probably going to be smart later. For instance, like waste removal. There's going to be smart waste removal. We're already starting to do it, where we can monitor the waste that's being put in, and we can say, okay, the trucks are coming too often, and you're getting charged too much from the waste department of that, or trash chutes, things like that. So you want to make sure there's Wi-Fi and power to go to your trash cans now. And so it's it's going that direction, but you got to do an audit of all of your operations and say, it's not smart now, it's going to be smart later.
Okay, so we have a bit of time for questions starting right now. Is there any questions you have for Greg before he needs to take off? As we're looking at how to consolidate, how to future-proof, how to pull together these disparate systems that you have in your properties or that you want to put in your properties. So raise your hand if you've got a question.
I asked this in one of our boardroom meetings, and maybe you could address it. So from the developer's point of view, we question whether we should start with the hardware that we want or with the integrator service like SmartRent that we want. And what we find is, when we looked at your slide, you work with Yale locks, but maybe we like a Schlage lock that's Z-Wave. They're all Z-Wave locks, but you might work with one lock, another company works with another. Why is it that the integrators don't say, well, we'll work with any Z-Wave lock?
Yeah, we're working on that right now. We're going to be releasing for Schlage. It's just a matter, it's not necessarily on all of the providers, it's on the lock manufacturers as well. To kind of make sure that they're integrating into our system. But if you're working off of the same protocol, it should happen. Well, the difference is when you've got a Schlage lock that you're already in there with, and it's not it's a Bluetooth protocol, and now you're kind of got a Frankenstein operation going on. So if it's Z-Wave, yeah, there's definitely the easier path to get that all integrated in. So whether it's Yale or a different type of lock manufacturer.
It's certainly been interesting to watch the ecosystem over the last decade. You've got companies like Apple who said, we're going to come in, we'll be the hub, and just thinking that their might alone was going to attract everyone to integrate to them. And then we saw very few saying, I don't know if I necessarily want to do it the way you want us to do it. You have seen individual providers like your Yales and Schlages that said, we're going to do it and we'll have an app. But then when everyone realized, when you have 10 different apps for all the different services, this isn't it. So now you have companies like SmartRent that are trying to kind of be the middleman, and it makes sense, and we're going to continue to see evolution for sure. Question?
In terms of electric vehicles, is SmartRent doing anything to integrate with EV chargers and being able to charge the resident from the app, so that is still all the same?
Yeah, right now, I believe it's on the roadmap, not necessarily something that's launched at this point, but as far as the parking side of things and the monetizing the parking side, we can. But when it comes to the EV chargers, that's something that I know that we're working on, but not quite there yet.
So your vision would be to potentially, within that app, be able to see how far is my car charged, when is it done, get a notification through that, and maybe talking to some of the other systems in my smart apartment. Okay.
I don't want to touch on one thing. The second part of your question, I don't think we got answered. What kind of comes first, the chicken or the egg? Part of that. I think it's your provider first, because if you're vetting out your provider first, you're going to know what your option list is there. Also, there's a lot of providers that are very proprietary in their hardware, right? So meaning that if you have proprietary hardware in there and you don't want to use that provider anymore, you're still stuck with that hardware, and it could be a very costly change to be able to do that, right? So you're going to have to change it out anyway. So knowing that you have some hardware flexibility and that you've got name brands that you can still use even if you don't use that provider is probably going to be key on that.
Makes sense. Other questions? Another one here in front.
So I have one more question. In terms of like the tenant, what does it look like to them? Is it a smart rent app, or do you kind of white label to whatever the property is?
Good question. No, it's a smart rent app. So upon move-in, they're automatically going to get sent a link to download the app. Once they download the app, it's already paired to their apartment, so all of their devices are already there. And it's a pretty user-friendly app that they can start now creating their guest codes. They can do basically run their entire apartment. If you have access control with this too, that ties in as well, so they'll have all their access amenity codes. There's also tutorials that you want to add an Alexa or a Google Play in there. So it comes with all the different tutorials in there. And then since it's our app, we also have a 24/7 support service in there. So meaning that if somebody gets locked out or they can't remember their code, they don't call the on-site teams anymore, which is an operational saving. They call us, and we handle it, and we have a 24/7 support through that app.
Great. Other questions? So given that, if you can join me in a round of applause for Greg. We appreciate him and Smart Rent being a sponsor.
Thank you.
We'll let you go be a good dad and coach the game. And we'll take these last 10 minutes, and you feel free to.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
One of the things in education is that when you take the opportunity at the end of a lecture, at the end of a chapter, to reflect back on what is it that I learned and how am I going to apply this, the research shows that helps solidify that into the future, and it adds value. So we're going to take our last 10 minutes here. If you're willing, you've got to participate to make this work, to think through what are some things that really stood out to you over the last 48 hours. What is something that you didn't expect to learn here that you're now taking back? And if you be willing, raise your hand and kind of share that with the group.
I believe this weekend has been eye-opening to making sure that we are prepared for what the future brings. Many of the players that we've probably ran into years ago don't exist now, and many of the components have changed, but future-proofing your buildings and making sure that you're versatile in whatever you want to input into your buildings is quite important, because then when it comes to those players becoming non-existent or changing the way that they do things, you can easily be adaptable to it, and especially with today's demographic. Many people are into electronics. We know that technology is the wave of the future, so we do best to keep up with it.
Yeah, I like that. You may be sitting on the fence in the sense that you're like, I'm not sure if the future is going to tip this way or to tip this way, and you may feel like I can't make a decision until I know the answer to that question. And I'm going to share a little tip with you. There is, from a business strategy perspective, there is a technique called strategy planning. And the way that works is that if you've got some key items, you're like, I'm not sure if the future is going to look like A or it's going to look like B, what you do, and you may have, here's one important question I don't know the answer to, and here's a second question I don't know the answer to. You can create this wonderful 2x2 matrix that says, okay, if the answer is yes to this and no to this, and yes to this and no to this, I can paint a picture of here's what the 4 worlds in the future might look like, and then start brainstorming, if we start going in this future, what am I going to do? How am I going to react? Where am I going to invest? And do that for all 4 worlds. And then start saying, what are some key indicators that exist that will allow me to know if we're starting to steer into this particular quadrant so that you can start taking action. We applied this when I was working with SanDisk in Tel Aviv, where this was over a decade ago. They were worried about flash disk storage. They're like, the future is supposedly going to be all about cloud computing. How much future is there going to be for us with flash storage if everyone's just storing everything in the cloud? And are they no longer going to have huge amounts? And we kind of know what the future has happened now, 10 years in the future, but they were starting to plan out different options. Okay, I think we've got another comment here in the back.
Oh yeah, something at our table we talked about is how prevalent managed Wi-Fi or community Wi-Fi is now. We've dabbled with it at a couple of our communities, doing retrofits, but I think going back, I'm going to tell everyone it needs to be an expectation in the next 6 to 12 months that if it can be, it goes everywhere now.
Yeah, it sure seems like every session it's come up, and that we're seeing, especially with Katie this morning, more detail on how that becomes important to give that coverage throughout the entire property, but also to be creating those virtual bubbles to manage devices. Other thoughts and things that stood out to you as a group? Perhaps, while you're still thinking, going back to the managed Wi-Fi, and Kate, you're in here, right? Here you are. When you first deployed this, what were some of the steps to deploying it? If you're giving advice to another developer here saying, okay, we need to go all in on this on our next community, what should they start with today? Would you be willing to share your thoughts on that?
So I think being that our company is much younger than the average multifamily, we didn't really have a lot of the pain points that probably a lot of you guys have had, where we have buildings from the 80s or anything like that. We were new construction starting only in 2004. So we were already pre-wired for this. But one thing was, going through the iterations of, okay, back then here's who the cable provider is in your neighborhood, call them, set it up, choose your package. And that was before, kind of one-stop shop for billing, right? So I guess multifamily, I don't know if you're including everything in the rent and then billing back for utilities, or how that works in multifamily. But in student, right, they just pay their rent, and they're getting their utilities are billed through that same portal, and it's all kind of one check each month. So hey, you got to include your cable and internet. So I think each year we were making slight shifts, but it was always kind of even from the beginning. But I think the biggest thing is where you can, try to include that your architect from the very beginning on like your thoughts there, because they're not low voltage experts. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I'd share with anybody, especially builders, is don't assume that your MEP or your architect is a low voltage expert, or that they're going to do any design for your low voltage. And you're going to want to either hire a consultant, hire a tried and true low voltage sub to try to help you with that. And an electrician is not that either. You want to specialize in this area if you're really going to go all in the best placement for those access points, best placement for access control, for cameras, all these things, AV. Electrician, architect, MEP, they're not doing that for you. You want to get a specialized low voltage, either consultant or a sub that you're going to use over and over again.
Is there any vendor or consultant that you would recommend that really gets the managed Wi-Fi the way you're deploying it?
There are a couple in the student space specifically. I have sort of issues. I can talk individually, but we actually we use the same company for everyone, but they're local to Athens. So I don't know how well that would work for others, but you can use like seek that out in your town or where your corporate office is. Or I can totally share that company with you guys, but you can't steal them because I need them for all of my projects.
Okay, well, thank you. You can talk to Kate if you want that information. Well, I hope that if you have one in your mind and you weren't willing to share it with the group, that's fine. But I hope you're writing it down. I hope you take that back and really convert to action. Again, going back to 2 days ago, our goal here for this conference is to be that catalyst, that allows you to take ideas, to take the technology, and to spark action to create transformation within your organizations. And I hope that we've created an environment for you to be able to do that. For some of you, if you're interested in revisiting us in October in Phoenix, we'd love to have you. If you have something within your particular communities that you think would be an interesting topic for these type of sessions, come up and talk to me afterwards. We're putting together probably another 4 or 5 panels, and we'd love to talk about issues that are interesting and relevant to the needs that you're experiencing each day. So if you can please join me in a round of applause for each other for what you've been able to learn.